Before the explosions, before the gunfire and chaos of Okinawa, there was silence. The kind of silence only the hills of Virginia can hold. In that quiet, a boy named Desmond Doss grew up learning that life was sacred. He was born in 1919 in a small town called Lynchburg, the son of a carpenter and a mother who clung fiercely to her Seventh-day Adventist faith. His father, a World War I veteran, carried the scars of his own battles, both on the field and within his heart. The trauma of the Great War haunted him, and Desmond grew up seeing what violence did not just to bodies, but to souls. His mother, Bertha, taught him the opposite, that love and mercy were greater acts of courage than hatred and revenge. One afternoon, when Desmond was a young boy, a small illustration in his family's Bible caught his eye. It showed the 10 Commandments, and right beside "Thou shalt not kill," there was the image of Cain standing over Abel. That moment seared itself into Desmond's mind. He never forgot it. It wasn't just a rule to him. It was a covenant. From then on, he vowed he would never take another life. But the world had other plans. When the Second World War broke out, America called its sons to arms. Men across the country lined up to enlist, to fight back after Pearl Harbor, to defend freedom, to prove their strength. Desmond wanted to serve too, but not with a rifle, not with bullets. He wanted to serve with bandages, with courage, with faith. He enlisted as a medic, determined to save life, not take it. But in the eyes of his fellow soldiers, that made him something worse than an enemy. It made him a coward. From the very first day of training at Fort Jackson, Desmond was an outsider. He refused to touch a weapon. He wouldn't train on Saturdays because of his Sabbath. He knelt beside his bunk to pray while others jeered. His commanding officers couldn't understand him. They tried to have him discharged, labeled as mentally unstable or unfit for service. Some of his own squad mates threatened him. "You'll never make it out there without a gun," they said. "You'll get us all killed." But Doss didn't argue. He just stood quietly, his calm eyes hiding a quiet storm of conviction. He wrote letters home to his wife, Dorothy, who stood by him through it all. She understood what few others could, that his faith wasn't weakness. It was his strength. Every night, while others cleaned their rifles, Desmond cleaned his medical tools and read his Bible. He prayed for the men who mocked him. He prayed for courage, not to kill, but to keep standing by what he believed. It wasn't easy. Every insult chipped away at him. Every punishment tested his resolve. But with every blow, something inside him hardened, not into hate, but into unshakable purpose. He wasn't there to prove himself right. He was there to serve. When a unit finally shipped out to the Pacific, the men were exhausted, angry, and unsure what lay ahead. The jungles of Guam and Leyte were brutal, filled with malaria, mud, and sudden death from the trees. But it was there, amidst the screams and blood, that Desmond Doss began to show who he really was. While others ducked for cover, he ran toward the wounded. He treated Japanese and American soldiers alike. He dragged men from foxholes, patched arteries with trembling hands, and whispered words of prayer over men who would never see home again. He still carried no weapon. The only thing that hung from his uniform was a Bible and a medic's bag. By the time his unit reached Okinawa in 1945, the war was nearing its end, but the cost was higher than ever. The island was a fortress, defended by entrenched Japanese troops willing to fight to the last man. The ridge they were ordered to take, known as Maida's Escarpment or Hacksaw Ridge, was a sheer 400-foot cliff. At its top awaited hell itself. The men knew it. The officers knew it. And Desmond Doss, the man who wouldn't carry a gun, would soon find himself in the middle of the most violent battle of the Pacific Theater. That night before the assault, Doss sat apart from the others, polishing his instruments and reading from his Bible under a dim lantern. Around him, the other men loaded ammunition, checked grenades, whispered final letters home. No one spoke to him. No one needed to. The next day would decide who lived and who didn't. When dawn came, the guns thundered. The ridge erupted into smoke and fire. The men climbed the cargo nets, one after another, scrambling into death's mouth. Machine guns tore the air apart. Mortar shells turned earth to shrapnel. The ground was soaked with blood and screams. Soldiers fell one after another, and medics were shot before they could even crawl to help. But in the middle of that chaos, Desmond Doss moved, calm, deliberate, fearless. He didn't carry a weapon. He carried hope. The moment his boots touched the top of Hacksaw Ridge, Desmond Doss entered another world, a place where the air itself seemed to scream. The smell of gunpowder, burned flesh, and wet earth mixed into something unforgettable. The Japanese defenses were dug deep, hidden in tunnels and caves carved into the ridge. Every time an American squad advanced, machine gun bursts cut them down like wheat before a scythe. The ridge became a graveyard. And yet, Doss kept moving forward. He wasn't armed with anything but faith. Around him, men who once mocked him were now crying out for help. Medic! Medic! The word echoed through the chaos. And each time he heard it, Doss ran toward it. Crawling through mud, smoke, and bullets, he reached men who were bleeding out, their eyes wide with terror. He patched wounds with trembling hands, dragged bodies through explosions, and whispered, "You're going to be okay, just hang on." When shells fell close, he covered others with his own body. He didn't stop to think about the danger. He only thought about the man in front of him. By afternoon, the battle was hopeless. The ridge was littered with bodies. The commanding officers called for retreat. The surviving soldiers scrambled back down the cargo nets, leaving the dead and wounded scattered across the plateau. But Doss didn't move. He looked around at the field of broken men, his brothers, and something inside him refused to leave. As the sun began to set and smoke rolled across the ridge, he made a decision. He would stay behind, alone, no rifle, no cover, just him, the wounded, and the enemy somewhere in the dark. He began to crawl through the field, one man at a time. The cries guided him, faint, desperate voices. "Help me, please." He dragged the first man to the edge of the cliff, tied a rope around his torso, and lowered him down by hand. It was a 400-foot drop, the line burning through his palms as he eased the man to safety. Then he turned around and went back. All night long, the pattern repeated. Fine. Carry. Lower. Pray. His muscles screamed. His hands bled. The enemy fired flares into the sky, lighting up the ridge in bursts of orange, and every flash revealed Doss, bent over another wounded soldier, refusing to stop. He could hear Japanese voices nearby, could feel bullets cracking the air inches above his head, but he kept going. When he grew too tired to stand, he crawled. When his knees gave out, he dragged himself on his elbows, and each time he set another man down, he whispered the same quiet prayer. "Lord, please, help me get one more." Hours passed. The battlefield was a nightmare of silence and sudden explosions. He pulled men from shell holes, dragged them through mud slick with blood, patched arteries with his own torn clothing. Some of the men he saved were the same ones who had cursed him, mocked him, called him a coward. But now, as they looked into his face, they saw not weakness. They saw courage that defied reason. At one point, a grenade exploded nearby, shattering his leg and showering him with dirt. He ignored it. He tied a splint with a rifle stock he found and kept moving. When shrapnel tore into his arm, he wrapped in his own bandage and kept lowering men down the cliff. He didn't count them. He didn't know how many he'd saved. He only knew he couldn't stop. Below, the soldiers who had retreated began to see something impossible. One by one, wounded men were being lowered from the ridge, unconscious, burned, bleeding, but alive. Each time a new body appeared on the rope, the men below would shout in disbelief. "Who's up there?" someone asked. "It's Doss," came the answer. "He's still up there." The night turned to dawn. His body was failing, but his spirit refused to. When he ran out of medical supplies, he used sticks and torn uniforms. When he ran out of morphine, he prayed. The battle didn't end. It only paused long enough for him to pull another man from the jaws of death. By morning, the count was staggering. Some said he saved 50 men. Others swore it was over 100. The truth didn't matter. What mattered was that, without ever firing a single bullet, Desmond Doss had done what entire platoons couldn't. He held the line. When the reinforcements climbed the ridge again, they found him slumped against a rock, pale from blood loss, barely conscious. His hands were raw, his uniform soaked with the blood of the men he saved. They carried him down, still clutching the rope. His first words weren't about himself. He simply asked, "Did I get them all?" Even then, he refused to be evacuated until every wounded man in reach had been brought down. For most soldiers, heroism was measured in kills. For Desmond Doss, it was measured in lives saved. He became a legend that day, not because he sought glory, but because he showed the world that conviction can be stronger than fear and compassion more powerful than violence. When Desmond finally left Hacksaw Ridge, it wasn't as a soldier returning from victory. It was as a man broken by the very battlefield he had refused to abandon. His body bore the cost of every life he saved. A sniper's bullet had shattered his arm, shrapnel had torn through his leg, and his flesh was riddled with infection. But even as medics rushed to treat him, he refused to lie still. On the stretcher, he noticed another soldier beside him, worse off. Without hesitation, Doss rolled himself off and told the medics to take that man instead. "He needs it more than I do," he said, then crawled through the mud toward safety. It was a scene that captured everything about him. Selflessness born not of duty, but of faith. When word spread of what he had done on Okinawa, the men who once mocked him fell silent. The same soldiers who had called him a coward now spoke his name with reverence. They said it felt wrong to go into battle without him there. One officer later admitted, "I've never been so wrong about a man in my life." The Army, known for its strict rules and hierarchy, had never seen anything quite like Desmond Doss. He didn't just save men, he changed them. While recovering in a military hospital, Doss was told he would be receiving the Medal of Honor, the highest military decoration in the United States. For a man who had refused to touch a weapon, it was a paradox, but it was also poetic justice. On October 12, 1945, President Harry S. Truman stood before him in the White House. Truman, a veteran himself, looked him in the eye and said, "I'm proud of you. You really deserve this. I consider this a greater honor than being president." The room was filled with generals, dignitaries, and reporters, but Doss seemed almost uncomfortable with the attention. He held the medal quietly, as if it were something borrowed. He knew what it represented, not glory, but sacrifice. The official citation credited him with saving 75 men. Doss never confirmed the number. "I couldn't tell you how many," he said softly. "It was just one more." The war ended, but for Desmond, peace didn't come easily. The malaria he had caught in the Pacific stayed with him for years, flaring up without warning. His injuries made physical work difficult, and his hearing was permanently damaged after a medical accident during surgery. But he never complained. He returned to Virginia, built a small farm, and tried to live quietly. He grew vegetables, raised animals, and watched the seasons change. A simple life for a man who had faced hell. Dorothy, his wife, stood by him through everything. She said he would sometimes wake up at night, drenched in sweat, reliving the cries of the wounded. The horrors of war never truly left him. But even then, he would sit on the porch, open his Bible, and find peace in the same verses that had carried him through Hacksaw Ridge. He didn't see himself as a hero. He saw himself as a man who did what anyone should do when faced with suffering: help. As the years passed, his story faded quietly into history books, known mostly to veterans and church communities. Then, decades later, filmmakers and historians began to rediscover what he had done. People were stunned that such courage could exist without violence, that a man could stand unarmed amid machine guns and grenades and somehow prevail. His life became proof that heroism doesn't come from killing enemies. It comes from saving lives in spite of them. When asked once how he managed to keep going on that ridge, he answered in the simplest way possible. "I just kept praying, 'Lord, please help me get one more.'" That sentence, humble and unadorned, carries the weight of everything Desmond Doss represented. The belief that compassion is stronger than hate, and that even in the darkest places on earth, one man's faith can light the way. He lived long enough to see the world finally recognize his story, to see young soldiers watch the film based on his life, and feel something shift inside them, a reminder that courage wears many faces. Some carry rifles, others carry stretchers. When he passed away in 2006, the military honored him not just as a soldier, but as a legend, a man who proved that conviction, when lived fully, can be mightier than any weapon. And somewhere in the memory of every medic, Every soldier who prays for strength under fire, the quiet voice of Desmond Doss still echoes. Please, Lord, help me get one more. Decades have passed since Desmond Doss last wore his uniform, but his story refuses to fade. It lingers, carried through generations not just as a war tale, but as a testament to what one person can stand for when the world seems to have lost its moral compass. In every generation, war changes its weapons, but courage, the kind Doss embodied, never changes. In the decades after World War II, many of the men who fought at Hacksaw Ridge lived out their lives quietly, each haunted in his own way. Yet almost all of them remembered one constant image: a small, wiry medic with soft eyes, dragging bodies through hell while praying under his breath. For them, Doss wasn't just a comrade. He was something like a guardian angel. Some said that when bullets whizzed past and death seemed inevitable, they would think of Doss and find strength. The man they once mocked had become their moral compass, proof that faith and love had a place even amid carnage. Historians later called Doss's actions miraculous. Military analysts tried to explain how one man could survive a night alone on an open ridge, under machine gun fire, saving dozens without a weapon. They counted the distances he must have crawled, the weight he must have carried, the odds against him, and none of it made sense mathematically. But faith rarely does. What he did wasn't about numbers. It was about conviction carried to its ultimate extreme. His Medal of Honor citation remains one of the most extraordinary ever written. It describes a man who refused to retreat, who risked his life repeatedly to save others, who treated his own wounds rather than burden another man. Yet even that document, signed by generals and stamped by history, barely captures what he truly represented. Desmond Doss lived in a time when men were judged by how many enemies they killed, yet he redefined heroism by how many he saved. In a world consumed by destruction, he chose creation. In a war of hate, he embodied compassion. And in doing so, he exposed a truth so simple and yet so often forgotten, that courage is not the absence of fear, but the triumph of conscience over it. After the war, as technology advanced and humanity entered new eras of conflict, his name resurfaced whenever people questioned what it meant to serve. He became a symbol in military ethics classes, in sermons, in schools, a reminder that belief, when lived fully, can reshape even the darkest human instincts. Soldiers who would never share his religion still spoke of him with reverence. They saw in him something beyond faith. They saw humanity at its purest. When the film Hacksaw Ridge was released decades later, the world finally saw what veterans had known all along. It wasn't the explosions or the gunfire that defined Doss's story. It was a stillness in his eyes when he chose to stay behind while everyone else retreated. It was a quiet plea he whispered again and again, asking for strength to save just one more man. In that single prayer lay the essence of everything noble in humankind: endurance, mercy, love. Desmond Doss never preached. He never sought to convert or condemn. His life itself was a sermon. He proved that faith doesn't need to shout to be heard. It needs only to act. Even now, long after his passing, his name is spoken in military academies, churches, and documentaries around the world. But perhaps the greatest tribute to him isn't in medals or films. It's in the hands of every medic who kneels under fire to save another, in every soldier who chooses compassion when hatred would be easier. Because in a world where killing is often glorified, Desmond Doss stood as living proof that saving life, even one life, can be the greatest act of valor. And maybe that's why his story endures. Because every time the world grows darker, people look back to that ridge in Okinawa, to a single man silhouetted against smoke and fire, whispering to himself, "Please, Lord, help me get one more." The prayer still echoes, not just across battlefields, but across generations, a reminder that no matter how brutal the world becomes, mercy will always be mankind's most powerful weapon.